Minister Markfield.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The proposed changes to Hong Kong's extradition laws have understandably caused grave concern in Parliament and across the country. Already this week I've responded to an urgent question and in an adjournment debate on the issue. I should now like to take this opportunity to update the House on latest developments. Overnight on the 11th of June, thousands of mainly young protesters blocked the roads around the Hong Kong central government offices and the Legislative Council complex. There have also been violent exchanges between protesters and police. I appreciate that these scenes will have shocked many members of the House and indeed many millions of our constituents, and I should like to take this opportunity to appeal once again for calm and considered dialogue. Freedoms of association, speech and expression are all guaranteed by the joint declaration signed by the Government of the People's Republic of China and the United Kingdom in 1984 and enshrined in the Hong Kong Basic Law. I'm sure the House will join me in expressing grave concern at the violence that has occurred. It is imperative that any protests are conducted in a peaceful manner, but also that the authorities' response is proportionate. Despite the violence that occurred yesterday, and I should perhaps report that since that time there has mercifully been calm in the vicinity of the Hong Kong buildings to which I referred, it is important to recognise the unprecedented and overwhelming peaceful expression of public opposition that we saw at the march on the 9th of June, with families, church groups, business owners and professional associations all well represented. This was one of the largest single demonstrations of public concern in Hong Kong since the handover in July of 1997. There can be no doubt that the strength of public feeling in Hong Kong is profound about the proposed changes to Hong Kong's extradition laws and, of course, to their broader implications. As the Foreign Secretary made clear in his statement yesterday, we urge the Hong Kong government, even at this late stage, to heed these concerns and to engage in meaningful dialogue with local and international stakeholders. Now is surely the time to pause, to reflect upon the impact of these controversial proposals. It is vital that the measures are subject to full legislative scrutiny and that the Hong Kong government gives proper consideration to all alternative proposals. The proposed bill had been due for a second reading on the 12th of June, yesterday. However, the planned debate has been postponed until further notice, owing to the protests. A vote on the proposals was due on the 20th of June, and it is not clear yet whether the protests will affect that timetable. Madam Deputy Speaker, you will already be aware that the UK government is fully engaged on this issue. I spoke on Monday about some of the actions we have already taken, including the Foreign Secretary's joint statement with his Canadian counterpart on the 30th of May, the British Consul General's statements locally, and our engagement with all levels of the Hong Kong government, including the Chief Executive, Carrie Lam herself. In all these contacts, we have reiterated our message of allowing time for proper consultation and for adequate safeguards to be included in any legislation to address key human rights concerns. In addition to the Foreign Secretary's statement yesterday, in which he called upon the Hong Kong government to listen to the concerns of the people and to take steps to preserve Hong Kong's rights and freedoms and its high degree of autonomy, he also made those concerns directly clear to the Chief Executive, Carrie Lam. We shall continue to engage the Hong Kong government on this critical issue and to raise our concerns with the Chinese government, reiterating the fundamental importance of upholding the Sino-British Joint Declaration. The British Consul General to Hong Kong, Andy Hayne, most recently discussed developments in Hong Kong, including those extradition proposals, with the Director of the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office and the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Beijing in April 2019. I have been in very close contact with him in recent days. I note that the Chinese ambassador to London commented on BBC's Newsnight programme last night that the joint declaration is, as he put it, a historic document that has completed its mission. Once again, I strongly disagree. The joint declaration remains as valid today as it did when it was signed over 35 years ago. That joint declaration is a legally binding international treaty registered with the United Nations. Its objectives clearly apply to both of its signatories, the Government of the People's Republic of China and the UK. It remains in force and it remains acutely relevant to the conduct of day-to-day life in Hong Kong. We expect China to abide by its obligations. I should make clear that we do not believe that the proposed changes to extradition laws in themselves breach the joint declaration, as the treaty is silent on matters of extradition. However, we are concerned that the proposals, as currently framed, risk leaving the extradition process open to political interference. This could, of course, in future undermine Hong Kong's high degree of autonomy and rights and freedoms guaranteed in the joint declaration that are, of course, central to its continued success. These concerns are heightened by the knowledge that the court system in mainland China lacks many of the judicial safeguards that exist in Hong Kong. We remain concerned, Madam Deputy Speaker, at the continuing detention and trials of human rights lawyers and defenders and the lack of due process and judicial transparency within mainland China. It is, of course, alarming at the prospect, or it is alarm at the prospect that fear of politically motivated extradition to China could cause a chilling effect on Hong Kong's rights and freedoms, and more insidiously might result in increasing self-censorship. Madam Deputy Speaker, Hong Kong matters hugely to the United Kingdom, not only because of our shared history. There are some 300,000 UK citizens living there, and many more who travel to and through Hong Kong each and every year. Hong Kong is one of the most thriving, exciting, dynamic cities in the world. It retains its distinctive identity both within China and internationally. It is, of course, a global financial centre and serves as a gateway to one of the biggest markets in the world. We remain committed to strengthening our rich and wide-ranging relationship with Hong Kong. We shall continue to work together as partners in support of global free trade, and we shall continue to develop our bilateral trade links with Hong Kong. However, it is also vital for Hong Kong's continued success that one country's two systems is fully protected and that the rights and freedoms that make Hong Kong such a prosperous city are safeguarded. To conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, I once again call on the Hong Kong government to pause, to reflect and to take meaningful steps to address the concerns of the people, of businesses, of the legal professions, of judges and the international community about the proposed changes to the extradition law. We must and we shall continue to press them so to do. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Foreign Secretary M.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Minister of State for advance sight of his statement and the customary tone of concern and deliberation that he brings to these issues. At the outset, I'd like to ask him a couple of specific questions about the proposed extradition bill, which I don't think were covered in his statement. First, whether the government has sought or received any safeguards from the Hong Kong authorities that once this proposed bill is on the statute book, that the powers it contain cannot and will not be extended to include the extradition of political activists and dissidents. And second, what safeguards have been sought or received with respect to British citizens living in Hong Kong and British national overseas passport holders should the proposed extradition bill be passed? But, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Minister of State has rightly observed our concerns go deeper than those specific issues, the implications of the extradition bill and the violent protests we have seen on the streets of Hong Kong in recent days. Our concerns also must go to what has undoubtedly been the steady erosion over recent years in compliance with the joint UK-Sino Declaration signed in 1984. The agreement which was supposed to enshrine the one country, two systems approach and which was supposed to ensure, I quote, a high degree of autonomy for Hong Kong and to protect its political, cultural and social rights and freedoms for at least 50 years after the 1997 handover. Just 22 years on, we see those freedoms and that autonomy being steadily taken away. Last September, we saw that the Hong Kong National Party was banned on so-called grounds of national security, the first time since 1997 that any Hong Kong party had been outlawed by the authorities. In April, we saw 9 individuals, students, professors and human rights activists found guilty of incitement to public nuisance, just for the supposed crime of organising 2014 umbrella protests, facing sentences of up to 7 years in prison. And now we have this proposed extradition bill, which many fear is the thin end of the wedge when it comes to Hong Kong's judicial independence. No wonder, Madam Deputy Speaker, that opinion polling by the University of Hong Kong has found that public confidence in the one country, two systems commitment has fallen from 77% in 2008 to just 40% today. No wonder that our Foreign Affairs Select Committee has said that China is moving closer to a one country, one system approach. And it is sadly no wonder that we have, as a result, seen protests in Hong Kong in recent days and the growth of the pro-independence movement in recent years. So the big question today, Madam Deputy Speaker, is what is the UK government prepared to do to demand that the Chinese authorities go back to the commitments that they made in the 1984 statement, which, as the Minister of State has said, the Chinese ambassador was saying last night is a historic document. But, you know, they have been saying it for 2 years. 2 years ago, they said it was a historical document which has no practical significance and is not binding. And I agree with the Minister of State when he condemns those comments, but we have to ask, is it no wonder that the Chinese are so dismissive of the joint agreement and prepared to commit flagrant breaches of it if we as a country are not prepared to protest when they do so? And let me make it clear, I don't mean this as a personal criticism of the Minister of State, but as a general indictment of the government's approach over recent years, which has not been as clear and robust, and that as just set out by the Minister of State. And it is not just me making that indictment. Last year, it was Chris Patten, the former member for Bath, the last British governor of Hong Kong, who described the government's stance towards China as craven, in seeking a trade deal at the expense of advocacy for the human rights in Hong Kong. He said that a series of, I quote, outrageous breaches of the 1984 declaration had prompted little more than, I quote, a slightly embarrassed clearing of the throat and some tut-tutting from the government. And this is a theme going back to 2015, the year after those umbrella protests when George Osborne visited China and was praised by the state-run media for, I quote, being the first Western official in recent years who stressed more the region's business potential instead of finding fault over the human rights issue. And last year, after her own visit, the Prime Minister was praised by the Chinese state media for, I quote, sidestepping human rights in favour of pragmatic collaboration. They concluded, I quote, for the Prime Minister, the losses outweigh the gains if she appeases the UK media at the cost of the visit's friendly atmosphere. But those losses, Madam Deputy Speaker, do not outweigh the gains if they amount to the erosion of democracy and autonomy in Hong Kong, if they amount to the abandonment of the 1984 joint agreement, and if they amount to the endangerment of the rights and freedoms of Hong Kongers, including British nationals and passport holders. So can I close, Madam Deputy Speaker, by asking the Minister of State what action he and the government will be taking, not just to express concern over these recent events, but also to end their craven approach to China and demand that the Beijing government gets back to honouring the terms of the 1984 agreement.
Thank the Shadow Foreign Secretary for her contribution. I very strongly accept the view towards the end of her speech that we clearly have to stand up at this stage, as we have, and I think it is a misapprehension to think that we have cravenly allowed the very delicate issues in relation to China, and they are broad-ranging, obviously, with not just trade but other aspects of a relationship with a leading nation in global affairs. Let me touch, if I may, on a number of the issues that she raised. We believe it is vital that the extradition arrangements in Hong Kong are in line with that high degree of autonomy and the rights and freedoms set down in the joint declaration. We believe it's vital not just for Hong Kong's best interests, but actually for China's. And I think one of the things that is very evident, even if there is a self-interest from the People's Republic of China, is having a recognised global offshore financial centre from their perspective, which has obviously not just financial services, but actually also legal services as well. The idea of a common law legal system, the idea clearly of of having the confidence of international capital markets will be vital for their own economic growth, not least with their very ambitious Belt and Road initiative into the future. We are, however, very concerned about the potential effects of these proposals. One of the reasons we would like to see a pause on this issue. The Right Honourable Lady will be aware this issue came to the fore, not in our understanding at Beijing's behest, but the whole thought about extradition, of course, was a particularly difficult case, a case of a Hong Kong national who had escaped from or had committed or allegedly committed a murder in Taiwan and then came back to Hong Kong, and for his extradition to be made to Taiwan. The Taiwanese authorities have not demanded this, but nonetheless this has made for a difficult situation as far as extradition is concerned. We understand, and we would, as I said, in fact, in response to the urgent question by the Honourable Lady for Hornsey and Wood Green on Monday, we very much understand that there are very large ramifications, and the prospect of relatively minor offences being subject for extradition of UK or indeed other non-Hong Kong nationals being sent away back to China on what might be trumped up political charges, particularly with the anti-corruption drive that has been put in by President Xi's administration. So we would entirely agree with that situation. Madam Deputy Speaker, if you will let me indulge to say a little bit more, because there were some general issues about the UK-China relationship that the Right Honourable Lady brought up, and I think it would be appropriate to raise them at this stage. We all know that there are great opportunities but also challenges with the growth of China. It is in our interests that China supports a rules-based international system, but it is pushing back in some key areas in that regard. We believe that system is under huge strains for a variety of reasons, and we're entering a period of greater strategic competition. Engaging China is vital for preserving and evolving existing structures. But we do and will continue to challenge China where we disagree on its approach to freedom of navigation in the South China Sea. We speak up very strongly on human rights violations, such as those in Xinjiang. We are active in ensuring that Hong Kong's specific autonomous rights, freedoms and high degree of autonomy is respected in full. We do take a very clear view of our own national security. Along with other countries, only last December we named China as responsible for a particularly damaging cyber intrusion. As we look at the coming decades, it is clear that our relationships with high-growth economies such as China will be increasingly important, not only to our own growth, but also to the shape of the global system in the face of technological transformation. Striking a balance, and it will inevitably always be a balance, but the right balance in our relationship will be more important than ever.
Mr.
Mr. Speaker, I'm a Sinophile, but Beijing's interactions with Hong Kong at the moment are deeply unhelpful, and it's particularly an issue because Hong Kong can be that bridge into China and out of China. In 2017, on the eve of Carrie Lam's ascension to the role of Chief Executive, I visited with other members of Parliament and met both with civil society groups but also members of the legislature. Even back then, there was a palpable sense that there was a wrong trajectory and a wrong pace towards greater integration. What message can we send from this House to civil society in Hong Kong, and in particular members of the legislature, to say we are there for them, we are watching what is happening?
May I thank my honourable friend for Oxford and Southend East, who obviously has great interest in these matters, having been a Foreign Office Minister in the past himself. I think the biggest message we can send is the very fact that there has been such attention, that this is the third parliamentary debate that has taken place. This is clearly followed very avidly in Hong Kong and will continue to do so. We want to see peaceful demonstrations, and it is actually worth pointing out that the rule of law does apply as far as demonstrations are concerned. And in some of the Occupy movement demonstrations that took place in the past, for example, where there was an overreaction or a perceived overreaction from Hong Kong police, there were fines and indeed prison sentences meted out. We want to ensure, as you say, as we have said, that there is the rule of law and the autonomy that allows freedom of expression in Hong Kong that is maintained. It is underpinned within the joint declaration and indeed in all the arrangements that have taken place that underpin the very essence of one country, two systems.
Hannah Bardell.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome advance sight of the Minister's statement and his strong words, but those strong words must be met with strong actions, because legal professionals professionals have also expressed concern over the rights of those sent across the border to be tried. The conviction rate in Chinese courts is as high as 99%. Arbitrary detentions, torture and denial of legal representation of one's own choosing are also common. He will know, and I'm sure he will agree, the fundamental rights of freedom of expression and assembly have been shown to be at risk in Hong Kong, with at least 72 protesters having been hospitalised by police. And I wonder whether he has seen some of the social media reportage of protesters who have been protecting journalists. One journalist for CBS Asia had been given a helmet and protected from tear gas by those protesters, and also the protesters were turning up to clean up the following day and ensure rubbish was recycled. So I think that shows just the spirit in which those protesters are trying to express their views. So does the Minister agree with me that such police violence is unacceptable? And what representations has he made and will he make to his counterparts in Hong Kong about the need for de-escalation? Many Hong Kongers fear the proposed extradition law will be used by authorities to target political enemies and have expressed concern about arbitrary detention and the use of torture. Following a recent report from the Foreign Affairs Committee, which called for the SCO to redouble its efforts to hold China to account through UN mechanisms, public statements and private diplomacy for its human rights violations. So what conversations has the Foreign Secretary and him in his ministerial position had with his Chinese counterpart about the need to protect human rights and freedom of expression?
Thank the Honourable Lady for her constructive comments. I think we are all seen both the television screens with, as she rightly says, 72, as we understand, hospitalised, with the vast social media, that this is a great concern. And understandably, as I mentioned in my contribution on Monday, the biggest single concern we have, is, of course, is that the Chinese legal system is so disaligned with the Hong Kong system, with arbitrary detentions, delays, and the like. We clearly want to see no violence either from protesters or disproportionate action from the police, and clearly we would hope and very much expect, as I say, given what has happened in the Occupy movements in the years gone by, that those guilty of that disproportionate action or indeed of violence will be properly brought to account. But may I say that the representations that are made to the Chinese government are obviously in a vast range of areas. It is meat and drink to all of us as Foreign and Commonwealth Office ministers, as indeed it is to ministers in a number of other departments. And may I specifically say that we will continue to have a 6-monthly report on Hong Kong. We are criticised at every opportunity by the Chinese embassy for so doing, but we believe that the one country, two systems model must be maintained. The management of it is the matter, obviously, for the Hong Kong government. However, the Chinese government is on the record as supporting the extradition proposals. We will continue to raise Hong Kong at all levels with China, and clearly, as she will appreciate, given the importance of this issue over the course of this week, there's been plenty of opportunities, both with China and with our Hong Kong counterparts, to make clear our very grave concerns, I think, that are shared by millions of our constituents.
Sarah Newt.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister has made a very important statement today. He's absolutely confirmed that the Government is going to step up its support for the Joint Declaration Treaty and to look at what more we can do to enforce it. And of course that's welcomed. But I'm very concerned, as I'm sure people across this chamber are and across the nation, for those over 300,000 British citizens that are in Hong Kong now. Well, we all want to see a peaceful resolution through strong diplomacy to resolve this issue. What assurance can the Minister give us that the Foreign and Commonwealth Office stand ready to support our citizens should the situation deteriorate?
I thank my honourable friend for Truro and Falmouth. She's absolutely right, and we obviously will do our level best to try and do whatever we can from our side to try and calm some of the passions, not least because there are 300,000 UK nationals there. We're not aware at present of any British nationals being caught up in the violence of the past 48 hours. This actually was something brought up by constituency neighbour, the honourable gentleman for St Austell and Newquay, in relation to British nationals overseas, where also we have some ongoing obligations. We are concerned about the potential detrimental impact of these extradition proposals on the rights and freedoms of all people resident in and travelling through Hong Kong. At present, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office is not providing specific advice relating to the proposed extradition bill as it affects British nationals overseas, particularly as this legislation is still under consideration. However, we do believe it is of the utmost importance that any extradition arrangements respect that sense of high degree of autonomy and rights and freedoms of the basic law, and they of course apply to all citizens, but we particularly have obviously British nationals overseas and indeed of course UK nationals very much at our heart, and will ensure that our Consul General there does all it can to deal with any of the concerns that are raised.
Mr. Carmichael.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yesterday I had a young Hong Kong woman come to my office and showed me pictures of what had happened to friends of hers who'd been protesting in Hong Kong. She showed me the videos of tear gas being used, and she showed me the injuries that they had sustained as the result of rubber bullets being used. These things happen because the authorities that employ these methods think that they can do it and get off with it. And she understood, as I think we should all understand, that the Joint Declaration is under attack now, not just from the People's Republic of China, but also by Carrie Lam's administration in Hong Kong itself. And the question, as the Honourable Member from Southend said, is what signals do we send? And I have to say to the Minister that the signal that he sends today in saying that the United Kingdom government does not see the extradition changes as a breach of the Joint Declaration is fundamentally wrong and has to change. The purpose of that Joint Declaration is to protect the human rights of the people of Hong Kong. The legislation that is proposed by Carrie Lam's government is a fundamental attack on these human rights. And if we are to stand by the Joint Declaration, then we should be opposing these changes unambiguously and vigorously at every turn. I have to say to the Minister, it is not good enough to hide behind a question of legal construction when what this is about is actually our political determination.
I think that is a rather unfair characterisation of our position, if I may say so, and I know that the Right Honourable Gentleman clearly has been our third exchange over the dispatch box during the course of this week, and I know he's had a long-standing interest in Hong Kong. I was merely making the point that the Joint Declaration was silent as opposed to on the issue of extradition. We very much feel that the spirit of the Joint Declaration, for the reasons that I've set out about the high degree of autonomy and freedom of expression and the like, is fundamental there. But it was just making the narrow point that extradition had not was not raised in the Joint Declaration of 35 years ago. He touched on an issue which I would like, if I may, to speak to the House. I think it is worth doing so because he touched on the issues of the use of tear gas and rubber bullets. And I want to talk a little bit, if I may, about export licences. I know this has been brought up in the pages of The Guardian during the course of today. May I just say this? The last export licence for tear gas hand grenades and tear gas cartridges used for training purposes by the Hong Kong police from the UK was in July of 2018. The last export licence for rubber bullets was in July of 2015. We rejected an open licence for riot shields as recently as April of 2019. And on this whole issue of export licences, close to all of our hearts, an issue that comes up time and again in the work that happens overseas, we are monitoring the situation very closely. And of course, we will undertake to review all current export licences. We will have no qualms in revoking any licences if they are found no longer to be consistent with the consolidated criteria, including criteria 2, which I think the Right Honourable Gentleman will be aware of, which deals with the respect for human rights.
Mike Gates.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister quite rightly criticised the Chinese ambassador's remarks on Newsnight yesterday. But isn't this, as has been said, part of a pattern? And isn't it clear that there is no independent judiciary in mainland China? So anybody who is either taken illegally, as has been the case in the past, like the booksellers, or taken with the complicity of the Hong Kong government authorities, is actually facing a potential unfair trial of the communist regime with terrible consequences. Isn't it time we were more robust in what we said about the nature of the Chinese regime, and instead of pulling our punches because we are so afraid that our economic situation post-Brexit will make us weaker, that we actually stood up for our values and the commitments we made when we signed and agreed the joint declaration and said there would be, for 50 years, one country, two systems.
I thank the honourable gentleman for Ilford South. We absolutely stand up for one country, two systems, and will continue to do so. On the floor of the House on Monday, I expressed some deep concerns about the Chinese legal system, which have, I think, to be taken very closely in mind when it comes to framing the extradition and indeed any changes that happen with individuals who are potentially subject to being extradited from Hong Kong to the mainland. And we will continue to make those robust statements. Let me just say this. It is important. We are in a world where China is rising, and we have to maintain an engaged relationship. And I'm well aware that the honourable gentleman from Ilford South understands that. He does understand, and this is the balance to which I referred earlier of diplomacy. I would like to think we have worked together in forging constructive collaboration on a range of shared challenges, from issues such as microbial health, climate change, tackling illegal wildlife trade, issues around money laundering, even in relation to the threats for the international security over North Korea. There are a range of global challenges where we have to build trust with China. I also accept, and I think we collectively must accept, our values are fundamentally different. And I'm afraid that there therefore will always be a block, and we will have to recognise that there are differing values that are there. Rightly, we have to have the confidence, along with partners, to stand up for the values that are close to our heart. But also we have to recognise, from our own history, those values do evolve in time. And working together and building that sense of trust with China and indeed with other rising nations in other parts of the world is an important part of diplomacy, and we shall continue to do so.